What is up, everybody? Welcome to another Saturday morning. That means another edition of the College Football Show here on RotoGrinders. Happy to be with you as usual. Got your two usual co-hosts on this morning. That is myself, Justin Van Zuiden, STL Cardinals 84, along with the Gridiron Scholar, John Laub. John, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. And you know what's interesting, Justin? I think there's a lot of different ways to build lineups on this slate. Like, I like to play 3 lineups every week. I think I could have put in 12 if I wanted to. I really find this slate fascinating because there's nice options at every price point, my friend.
Yeah, it is a really interesting slate. We're also getting a taste of some teams that maybe we haven't seen as much on some of the main slates. Some of the big kind of surprise teams this year, BYU, they're still undefeated. They're on a main slate for probably the first time, maybe the second time. It certainly hasn't been a lot. Illinois has been a big surprise. They're at Oregon today. So they're on the main slate. We've got Vanderbilt there inside the top 25 now. They play Texas today. So some surprise teams that we get to talk about on this slate. Indiana, another one, though they've been on more main slates. They're also undefeated. They've got some injury concerns today as well. So Tulane and North Texas, that's another kind of non-power conference showdown, but that game has a total of almost 70 points. And then you've got Navy as well. Navy and Army are both undefeated, shaping up to be the biggest Army-Navy game this year in quite some time. So lots of different teams for us to talk about today. Should be a fun slate, I think.
Yeah, actually, we got 3 undefeated, right? BYU, Army, Navy are all undefeated. We lost one this week at Liberty going down. I think that was Thursday night, if I remember. Liberty went down to Kennesaw State, I watched that game. That was crazy. Kennesaw had not won a game, and they completely beat Liberty. But yeah, so 3 undefeated teams who are not necessarily always on the slate. And you even mentioned Tulane or North Texas, my friend, right?
Right, yeah, with a big total.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, so lots of interesting stuff to get through here today. We do have some injury news. Last week, we saw Missouri banged up quite a bit. Brady Cook left the game, came back. He's still kind of in question for today. Nate Noel is out for Missouri, so they've got a tough matchup. Obviously not the same Alabama team we're used to, but some injury concerns with Missouri today. Trey Harris for Ole Miss is questionable. Game time decision. Not a whole lot of information has been disclosed there. They have to face a pretty good, though Oklahoma is underwhelmed as a team this year, still a pretty good defense there. So Trey Harris, certainly one to monitor as well. I just mentioned Indiana. Their starting quarterback, Curtis Rourke, is out today. So will be interesting to see how they handle things with a backup at the helm, if they can keep their undefeated season going. Anything else you're keeping an eye on as far as news and notes today?
Well, Haynes King of Georgia Tech is not playing again today, so he looks to be out. Jaden Ott of California, he looks to be in today, so that kind of disappoints me because I was hoping that we would get clarity on one running back for California. But there doesn't seem to be any other big Alex Orji, but I'm not going to be starting him at Michigan quarterback at this point, right, Justin?
Yeah, so that's just a pass.
It's a pass. So I think that's about the only news that I can see right now.
Yeah, that's about it from my end of the spectrum as well. Missouri, of course, the big one. That game's not till 3:30, so I'm not going to mess with their quarterback situation regardless. When Pine came in last week, he looked terrible, and then they ended up coming back and winning the game after Cook returned. So you could maybe consider Cook if you want to, but it's going to be the running game that I think we're going to talk about with Missouri when we get to that point. So let's go ahead and dive in. 12 games on the DraftKings slate today. Of course, if you are new, a couple of reminders before we get going in full force here. If you want questions answered on the air, you can check us out. Of course, you can drop some comments in the YouTube chat. We'll try to get those, but we'll prioritize the ones in our RotoGrinders Discord. You do not have to be a premium subscriber to get access to that. Just a RotoGrinders member, rotogrinders.com/Discord. And we have the live stream chat channel in there, which is where we'll take questions live on the air. So live stream chat within the Discord. I will pull that up maybe around the time we get through the DraftKings analysis here and take a peek. Also, a reminder that if you are interested in becoming a premium subscriber at RotoGrinders, we are introducing Combo Lite. This is our newest product, giving you the power of simulation for a fraction of the price of other tools. Competitors charge hundreds a month for their sim products. Combo Lite is just $39.99 a month, and it includes our SimLabs lineup building tool, plus content from some of your favorite DFS analysts. Combo Lite does not limit you to one sport. It includes SimLabs, access to the four most popular sports, MLB, NFL, NBA, and PGA. You won't find a more cost-effective option anywhere. And be sure to hit that thumbs up button. We know you're all getting up early, having your coffee, ready for some college football. We appreciate those of you that hit the like button on the YouTube for us. It takes 2 seconds. All right, let's go ahead and dive in at quarterback today. We've got quite a few pricey options on the slate. Maybe we'll limit the top tier to say the top 5 on the board, which would be Jalen Milroe. He's the only quarterback above 10,000 on DraftKings this afternoon. Jackson Dart, Dylan Gabriel, Morris, and Riley Leonard. Morris, of course, the quarterback for North Texas in that potential shootout with Tulane. Of those top 5 guys, are you interested in one particularly more than the other today?
I will say for GPP, yes. For cash games, I tend to be going down in value. I think there's value with the quarterback position, so I'm more in the next range. But I do think there's a player that we need to talk about, and that's Chandler Morris, the quarterback at UNT. I'm absolutely kind of shocked that he tends to be being ignored. I think it's based on the matchup, right? Tulane is a good defense, not as good as last year. However, if you look at the stats of Chandler Morris, he's second in the nation in passing yards, second in the nation in touchdowns. This team throws the ball like crazy. They really don't have a running back that I'm interested in. Also, I hinted at it. It's the highest over under, at least it was. Yes, isn't it 67.5? Over
yes, I think I saw 68.5 this morning. It's in that neighborhood.
Yes. And I love that North Texas is a home underdog. I just tend to like home underdogs in fantasy because they're going to be playing from behind. We have a dominant passing team. And when I looked at our ownership, we have them at less than 5%. I think that's a smash GPP. I'm not a big GPP player, but I do like to dabble. I'll say this. I have a GPP lineup with Jalen Milroe and Chandler Morris because their ownership are so low. You do have to go for value, obviously, at wide receiver and running back. But when I'm getting Milroe and Chandler at 12, 13% for Milroe and 5% for Morris, I really like that, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, Milroe's numbers have faded a bit the last couple of weeks. Obviously, Alabama has disappointed to some degree, but reasonably better matchup today. They're at home, and he's still been running, even though the production hasn't been there the last couple of weeks. I think he'll find more room today. Maybe he gets back into the end zone on the ground. Last week was the first week all season that Milroe didn't have a rushing touchdown. So certainly think that with his ownership kind of down in the dumps now, in the teens in terms of ownership, I think Milroe is a really interesting play today in tournaments. Like the call on Morris as well. Obviously, that UNT Tulane game is certainly stackable if you want to put a few parts of that together. So, and there's, North Texas has some value at receiver that we'll get to later. So I like those calls. I think Dylan Gabriel is also in that mix as well. If you think Illinois can keep that game competitive, Oregon is projected for about 38 points. The biggest risk there certainly would be a potential blowout. But if it stays close and Illinois is a top 25 team, I mean, not like they are generally a slouch opponent. I think Gabriel is in play as well today. All right. Thoughts on the next range of quarterbacks? We start going down the pricing scale a little bit. Josh Hoover is kind of the next guy that really gets my attention. That's the other high total game of the day. TCU and Texas Tech at 65.5. Will Howard in this mix as well. What are your thoughts on kind of some of the 7-8K quarterbacks?
I absolutely love Josh Hoover in cash games. Right now, Texas Tech, their opponent, and TCU's at home. Their opponent, Texas Tech, is the second worst pass defense. They're giving up over 300 yards per game. And if you look at their schedule deeper, it's not like Texas Tech has played a ton of elite quarterbacks. So they are really kind to opposing quarterbacks. Now, Josh Hoover's coming off some games in which not have been fantasy great, 16, 13, 26 points. So I understand why there might be some reservations. But if you look at overall against SMU, he had 32. Against UCF, he had 36. He ended up with 29 in the opening week against Stanford. So there is a nice ceiling there with Hoover. So I love him in that. I couldn't agree with you. You said you like, why did I forget the name? Who else did you like? Because I agree with you on that. Will Howard.
Yeah.
Man, Will Howard. He seems to be getting overlooked. And we do have him projected at 17 or 18% ownership. But I don't read a lot about him. When you look around Twitter, when you look at people who I respect for their opinions, Will Howard isn't being talked a lot about. But if you look at how Will Howard plays, they're home, they're coming off a loss. I think this is a smash spot for Ohio State here. And I think we might have some condensing of offensive numbers because Quinshon Judkins is coming off a hand injury. We don't really know how much he's going to play in this game. So that might open up some goal line carries. I know they have Trevion Henderson, but maybe the goal line carries are only split between Henderson and Howard now. And, of course, when you have, Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith at wideout. So I think Howard is a really great play. And he's he's under 8K, right, Justin? Isn't that a really tasty salary option right there?
Yeah, it is. And I think, some people see how pricey the receivers are, and that makes them worried about pairing them up in GPPs. But, that Nebraska defense got absolutely gashed by Indiana last week. What they finished 56 points, I think. So, Howard, certainly an option you don't want to sleep on today. I think, most people will probably go for Hoover in that range. I like them both. I think they're clearly the options kind of in this range. Maybe Morton you could look at if you want another GPP option in there. And then, the interesting thing, what do we make of the Indiana offense today? How do we think they react? So Rourke is out today. He had surgery. Taven Jackson will be their starter. He's 6.6K on DraftKings. He got a taste of action. Last week was a blowout. I'm not really putting much stock into what happened last week, but last year he wasn't that great in a somewhat limited sample. But any interest in Taven Jackson, Baron Morton, anybody else in kind of this 6-7K range?
I do believe that you have to be interested in Taven Jackson. I'm now a complete believer in Curt Cignetti, the Hoosiers coach, my friend. I was wondering, coming from James Madison, coming over to Indiana in the Big Ten, how would that offense translate, right? I don't know how much talent Indiana had in it, especially in his first year, but that offense is taken off. Taven Jackson has the potential here. He can run the football. He has had some game experience. So if you do, what is our ownership on him? We must be, let's see, we have less than 5%. If you want to put him and maybe like a Howard together, if you want to differentiate, you want to go for something different, I think Jackson is very interesting because you know what? Until I see a Cignetti quarterback not produce points, I'm going to be a believer in this offense. Now, I do think they'll run the ball a little bit more, but their offense, if you look at JMU and what they're doing this year, it's so efficient, my friend. So I think Jackson is a very nice pivot play this week, especially in a super flex position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's viable in GPPs for sure. Oh, yeah. In cash games, it's probably not necessary, but there's some other options as we get down to like bare minimum that I think are where everybody's going to go for their QB2 in cash games. And those are like the 5K guys. We mentioned Tulane, they're probably going to run the ball a lot, but they're projected for almost 40 points. Their quarterback, Darian Mensah, is 5K. Giovanni McCoy for Oregon State is 5,200. Brosmer for Minnesota, we've also got with a reasonable ownership projection. And look, these guys are like 5K, and being able to get a quarterback at 5K, if he can reasonably produce to the level of somebody that's more expensive, then, it just makes the rest of your lineup work. And if I sort, and I didn't even mention Mendoza on the other side of that game, and if I sort our quarterback by points per dollar, the 4 highest guys are actually the 4 or 5K players that I just mentioned: Mensa, McCoy, Mendoza, and Brosmer. So, I mean, you could put a lineup in with 2 of these guys if you want and play the wide receivers and running backs you want. Going away from, playing any of these 5K guys is going to be super contrarian. Like John mentioned, that GPP build with the 2 spend up quarterbacks, that's going to be really different today. But I mean, these 5K quarterbacks, do you have a preference? Would you play one of them, in a lineup? How are you handling it?
So my 3 lineups, and I'm cash game predominantly, even though I do like to dabble with a GPP lineup. Darian Mensah is in one of my 3 lineups, and Giovanni McCoy is in 2 of the 3 lineups. And to me, the difference is that McCoy is more likely to score points with his legs. The way Oregon State dominates at the goal line is with their option running game. And they used to have 2 backs, but right now it's just Hankerson. And I don't like Hankerson. I think he's 7.7K. I thought that was a little expensive at the run. Oh, we haven't talked. We'll talk about him later. But Hankerson they lost their other running back. So I like McCoy to probably get in the end zone with his legs. So I have 2 out of 3. But Mensah is really the player, I think, if you're looking at GPP and you're trying to differentiate, and we'll talk about a running back who's probably going to be very highly owned in that game. If you're looking to differentiate, you could go with Mensah. I don't necessarily think he has the floor of McCoy because he's not really a runner. If you haven't watched Tulane this year, McCoy is really good at the deep shots. Remember Jeff Blake with the Cincinnati Bengals when he would take those deep looping shots to Darnay Scott and Carl Pickens? And I know I'm
about all he was good at.
Right? He was so good. Well, Mensah's kind of that way. If you look at his advanced metrics, he's really good at the deep ball. And guess what North Texas can't defend, my friend? The deep ball. The thing is, Mensah doesn't get points as his leg. So I do like Mensah as a GPP contrarian off the chalk at running back in that game.
All right. I think all those guys are certainly in play. McCoy, right now we have as the most popular, then Mendoza, and then, Mensah, even though his points per dollar grades out a little bit better, is probably a little bit more risk reward. So I agree with that call on him in GPPs. Ja'Cory Brown, probably the other guy that we can throw into that mix. I mean, look, BYU's undefeated. And the algorithms know, and the odds makers know, like BYU is undefeated and UCF is 3-4, and UCF is favored in this game. So take that for what you will, but Brown will get some attention as well.
Yeah, there's no question. If you don't know, Brown is at UCF and he's replacing, they basically benched KJ Jefferson, and Brown is now the starter. He does have uber upside with his legs. However, he's not a really good thrower of the football, but he's got 100 yards rushing upside with 1 or 2 touchdowns on the ground.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to running backs today. And I think this is going to be a week kind of like a lot of the others where we've seen there's high-end talent at the running back position and there's good value at the wide receiver position. You're going to see a lot of people spend here. He's not the most expensive, but he's expensive-ish. I think Mekhi Hughes today, this, I believe, is the highest ownership projection I've seen on a main slate, perhaps ever. We've got Hughes at 63.4% ownership today. He's projected for over 30 fantasy points. North Texas has been gashed defensively, and Hughes is like almost $2,000 cheaper than the other most expensive running back on the slate. So really, he's a free square, it seems, today, unless he gets injured, correct?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I wouldn't use a player usually. What is he? He's 7.4. I wouldn't normally call it a free square, but I do think on this slate in cash games, he's a free square. And I don't remember ever seeing over 60% projected ownership. When you look at the data and you look at the defense of North Texas, and you're looking at the over-under, Mekhi Hughes just screams that he's going to get a floor of 25 points, right, my friend? I mean, there's almost no way around it. To me, the question is GPP. Do you want to play Mekhi Hughes in a GPP tournament? That, to me, at that high ownership, I almost think you have to pivot off of him in the GPP. I think he's cash game. Just take the free square. I have him in all three of my cash game lineups. The question is GPP. I did not put him in my GPP lineup because I want to try to differentiate. And what is it? 63% projected is just too high.
It's very high. And we've got a lot of running backs that are projected for good numbers today. I mean, we've got 4 other guys projected above 20. So in terms of your favorite pivots, the other guys we have projected kind of at least in that realm are all a little bit more expensive. So that's going to keep their ownership down, at least compared to Hughes. But all these guys have intriguing ceilings, right? We've seen RJ Harvey have huge games. We've seen Taj Brooks have huge games. Jordan James with Oregon as a big favorite today. Darius Taylor, we've got projected for 26 fantasy points. So those 4 guys would kind of be the best pivots, I think. And you know, Hankerson, if you want to throw him into that mix. But your favorite again of those kind of high ceiling guys as the pivot away from Hughes in a GPP would be who?
My favorite running back is Taj Brooks on the slate. I have him 2 in my cash game lineups with Josh Hoover because I like that game environment. I like the game stack in cash games very much. I also think when we're getting Taj Brooks at approximately 13% ownership, I think you can go there in GPP, and I think you can pivot off of Mekhi Hughes and take Taj Brooks in that lineup. Because if you look at Taj Brooks, and you mentioned his ceiling, 32. We have 2 massive games over 30, and we have games with 28 and 29 DraftKings points. So we have a massive ceiling with Taj Brooks in a really good game environment on the road. And the one thing, if you watched him against Baylor last week, and I did because I had Sawyer Robertson, so I was watching that game, they did not go away from giving the ball to Taj Brooks, even though they were trailing against Baylor. I see them, they're going to rely on Taj Brooks no matter what. He does have some upside catching the football too. So if I'm going to pivot off of Hughes, I do like Taj Brooks very much. And don't get me wrong, I love Darius Taylor, but his ownership is a little high for me in GPPs.
Yeah, I think it's still reasonably, you know, that's basically about a third of the ownership of Hughes. So I don't mind Taylor even in GPPs. All these guys, I totally agree on Brooks. I think when you factor in the upside, the total in that game, I like getting some exposure to TCU for sure. So running that back, if you think in a GPP as part of a game stack, and when you throw in the projected ownership of 12-13%, I think Hughes is a great play, a great pivot. Taylor, I'll have some as well, but all of those guys, super high ceilings today. And probably a reason why you're going to want to spend at the running back position, at least for one player. The mid-range, you know, you're going to see a lot of guys kind of get lost in the shuffle here because, you know, there's another value that we'll talk about that's going to be getting a lot of ownership. So all these guys, LJ Martin, Jeremiah Love, Jaden Blue, Justice Ellison, all getting lost in terms of the mid-range shuffle today because most people are going to pay up for one guy and pay down for another guy. Ellison is my favorite. You know, John mentioned earlier, Indiana's probably going to lean on the run a little bit more. They got their backup quarterback in there today. They're undefeated. They're still a home favorite. I think Ellison could push for 15 to 20 touches today. And, you know, he does not have a super high projection, does not have high projected ownership, certainly GPP only. But he's the guy that I'm intrigued on in this mid-range. Maybe Jeremiah Love as well, but anybody in here that you would be interested in?
You know, it's funny. I wrote about Justice Ellison in my Sleepers Conference season-long CFF leagues. I completely agree with you. Watching Indiana the last couple of weeks and trying to wrap my head around where the points are coming from, they do use a little bit of committee. So I think Ellison's ceiling might be capped. However, you're talking about a really nice floor. And last week he did score 29 DraftKings points. So that's a pretty nice ceiling. Do I expect him to get 29? Not necessarily, but he should get around 20 or more. I like that. So I love that call. The one player that I like that I don't think people are talking a lot about is LJ Martin. What do we have him at? Like 7% ownership? I think I looked at him 6.05. LJ Martin is pretty good. You mentioned it earlier, right? They are underdogs, but they're undefeated, BYU. And the one thing, Martin was injured earlier in the season. Like, he was kind of frustrating from a season-long perspective, and I got him on a lot of best ball teams, and he wasn't even on the field or performing well. But in the last 2 weeks, he has scored 27 and 25 DraftKings points. If you go back to week 1, he had 20 points. So LJ Martin is a fascinating player in this matchup. He doesn't have a lot of receiving upside, but he does have some touchdown equity. He scored 3 times on the ground in the last 2 games. And I do think BYU is going to keep this game. It's going to be a close game, I believe, with UCF. So I do like LJ Martin. He's not being talked about at all, my friend.
Yeah, he's not. Any of these guys, if you like them, they're certainly going to go under owned just because of how the optimal, quote unquote, lineup construction appears to look today. So, Love, Ellison, Martin, all these guys, I think don't be afraid to throw them into some GPP lineups today.
Oh, I got one more. Trevion Henderson, I think with 6K, my friend, is worth a bullet in a GPP if you don't go Will Howard.
Yeah, I like that call as well. And then the popular value options today, there's going to be a couple of them. Mentioned Nate Noel is out for Missouri today, so Marcus Carroll should get the majority of the carries for them. He's 4K. I like him a good bit. And then Wisner for Texas looks to be taking kind of control of that backfield. They are at Vandy today, projected for about 34 points, and he's 4.8K. So those are 2 guys that I think, in cash games, you're going to see most people go with Wisner and Hughes as their combo. Marcus Carroll, I do like a bit as well. So your thoughts on those values or anybody else you might like at running back?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that the community is so, and I agree with them on Wisner because I thought maybe his performance at Georgia, but it looks like he's taken over that Texas backfield. Even though the numbers didn't come up, they really kind of pounded Texas, right? I was a little surprised at how well they beat him up. Yeah. But I do believe Wisner's become the guy in that matchup. But I don't think I would do Wisner in a GPP. I think I would pivot elsewhere. Marcus Carroll is an interesting player, less than 7% ownership. Bama is not the Bama defense that we are used to. And Marcus Carroll, I don't think he's got like 35-point upside, but I think he's a very nice – he could have a ceiling of 24 points against the Crimson Tide here.
All right. Those are the guys I think in terms of if you're looking for value, just go with those guys. And, wide receiver would be a spot where you can differentiate a little bit more. We do have a couple of questions in the Discord. I will save the FanDuel question from NBA DFS for when we pivot over there, but Golf Nut with a couple of questions. Is Riley Leonard still too cheap? We didn't talk about Leonard a whole lot at quarterback. Any particular thoughts on Riley Leonard today? And then Jordan James was the other one he was asking about.
I happen to like Riley Leonard in a GPP environment. Just again, I'm not a massive GPP player, but I do think you can go with Leonard without any question. I think this Army-Navy game is interesting, and sometimes I'm more data-driven, but narrative street does occur, and you have Blake Horvath, who's the quarterback on the other side of the field, and they're kind of similar, right? Both quarterbacks are running quarterbacks, and if I'm going to bet on one of the 2 runners, I think Riley Leonard here is going to want to show Horvath that he's a very good college quarterback. I do like Leonard in this matchup.
And then Jordan James, any thoughts on him?
Oh, Oh, I like Jordan James. I think we have lower ownership, right? Am I
Yeah, it's because
under
he's kind of in that
20%?
mix. You got Taylor there, you got Brooks,
Yeah.
all those guys in there.
I mean, I like Jordan James. I did not put him in my GPP because the ownership was a little bit higher, but he could be a pivot. I think he'll do very well in this game today.
All right, and yeah, that Illinois rush defense, we've seen them. They've been up and down. They did play well as a team last week against Michigan. That game was kind of a slog, but certainly don't mind. Oregon's going to put up some points today, so I'm more on the passing attack. I've got
that's also why I like the passing attack more in Oregon this week.
Yeah, and that's segue into talking about wide receivers, where again we've got probably a spot where you're going to end up leaning towards a little bit more value. I don't think the super high end guys are necessary today. Trey Harris is questionable, plus a tough matchup. Ty Felton, tough matchup as well. So spending absolute top dollar, Luther Burden, questions about the quarterback there at Missouri, who's going to be in there today. I think this is a spot where you look to maybe start with Tez Johnson, who is significantly cheaper than Harris and Felton and Jack Beck, and tends to work in lineups a little bit better. So Tez Johnson is my starting point at 7.2K. Ryan Williams, another guy that, especially if you like Jalen Milroe, you could maybe match with Milroe in GPPs. But are you starting above Tez Johnson or anybody above Tez Johnson that you like?
I am not going in any cash games above Tez Johnson here. It is pretty interesting, right? For years, we've usually had those one or two receivers who are like just so much better than the field, right? Always getting floors of 30 points with up to 40. But I don't feel like this isn't the year, right, Justin, when we've been lineup building? I don't feel like there's that wide receiver who you've got to have at the very top. I'm very worried about Trey Harris and the environment and the injury. I completely agree with you. I can't, you know why I'm off of Burden? Normally I would like Burden, but Drew Pine is his quarterback. I mean, I've seen a lot of Drew Pine. I'm not convinced I'm not convinced he's going to be able to get him the ball enough. I do think I'm not going there. But if you want to go there, Jack Beck, but he's a little bit expensive for me, so I did not go there, and there's other options in that TCU passing game. I couldn't agree with you more on Tez Johnson. I think our teammate Jordan, he had wrote about it. Tez Johnson is a man beater. He's almost impossible in man coverage, and Illinois runs a lot of man coverage, and their defense is not very good. So I think Tez Johnson, he's by far to me the best player at this value. I will say, though, Jeremiah Smith in a GPP is completely viable with Will Howard. I think that is being overlooked. He is less than 10% ownership. He is a player. Look, we have a 37-point projected total for the Buckeyes. They're playing Nebraska, who we just saw got eaten up completely, as you mentioned last week. I think Jeremiah Smith, I don't like him in cash, but in the GPP, I think he could break the slate.
All right. Yeah, I like him in GPPs as well, for sure. And definitely an interesting pivot. Both of the Ohio State guys are in play for Igbuka as well, in play for GPPs. Josh Kelly, Lassiter for BYU, a couple other guys in that kind of middle tier that are going to get pretty high ownership today. I don't have a strong take either way on those guys. I do think Giles Jackson at 5,400, he's been more expensive than this a lot of the way through the year. I happen to like Washington just a little bit today from a game perspective. With Indiana going with their backup quarterback, I think Washington can maybe pull an upset here. Jackson is 5,400. I like him in GPPs a good bit today. Anybody in this kind of 5-6K range that you've got your eyes on?
Well, I am going to talk about one of them when we do our Fantastic Four later, so I won't mention that now. I do think Mario Williams, the wide receiver for Tulane, I had mentioned Mensa is that deep thrower of the football. Guess what Mario Williams is? The deep pass catcher of the football. Now, there is a wide range of outcomes with Mario Williams. He could have a 7-point week, or he could have a 25-point week. I do like him as a GPP pivot if you want to get off Mekhi Hughes. I do think that environment, when you have a 68.5 total, you have to be interested in it. And Mario Williams is the player I'm interested in at wide receiver for Tulane, my friend. And here's someone who slid off the radar. We mentioned Indiana. Elijah Surratt has been very good this year. We have him at less than 2% ownership, and I get it. The change at quarterback, right? We don't know Washington. But if you are correct, Justin, and Washington's going to push this game, and I think that's very good assessment. Washington could win this game at Indiana. Elijah Surratt is a very interesting player who's not being talked about at all.
Yeah, I was just thinking that as well. And I think part of that stems from the fact that he was pretty popular last week. They won by 50 points, spread the ball around a good bit, didn't need to throw at the end of the game. Now you got the backup quarterback in there. That's why nobody's playing him. And I understand, but certainly a guy that you can consider for your GPP lineups today. All right, let's get to the value options. I've mentioned, there's a whole lot of guys at say 50, 100 and under that are going to be pretty popular or project pretty well. Savion Williams for TCU is my favorite. I like Josh Hoover. You can pair those guys up pretty easy. He projects as one of the best point per dollar options at wide receiver today. We've had some people in the YouTube chat asking about the Texas pass catchers with no bond. You got Gunnar Helm at 3,300. You've got Wingo at 3,300. So those guys are dirt cheap. Dalton Carnes for North Texas, I like pairing up if you're playing their quarterback a little bit. He's had a couple good weeks in a row. Daniel Jackson for Minnesota. I mean, these are guys that are just kind of coming to me here as I scroll through the list. There are others, but who are some of your favorite values here at wide receiver?
I love the mention of Texas wide receivers, and I've been looking at it all morning. I think I found out last night was the news that Bond wasn't going to play. I like Gunnar Helm a lot. I think he's very viable in cash games. Vanderbilt is very poor against the tight ends, everyone. And Gunnar Helm has been very good for Texas. I like him in cash games very much. But I think the player who's being overlooked from a GPP perspective, how about Matthew Golden, my friend? He was at Houston last year. He transferred over to Texas. He has been pretty nice this year at times. 20 points and 16 points to open up the season against, I think it was Colorado State and Michigan. He has been down a little bit because they moved away from him. But Matthew Golden should step into this and get some opportunity here. So I like Golden and Helm from the Texas standpoint. Now, I do believe if you are going to build lineups here, there's a lot of value. How about Daniel Jackson, Minnesota against Maryland? I think Daniel Jackson, he's been peppered with targets. It's not a great offense for throwing the football, but Daniel Jackson is clearly the top guy for the Golden Gophers, so I like him a lot. If you want, he has high ownership, but I like him. Trent Walker out of Oregon State. He's definitely their number one guy for the Beavers at wide receiver. I agree with you on Savion Williams. I like him also. So I think there's a lot of really good options. I have one of those receivers in nearly every lineup this week because there's just value at that position.
If you had to rank your interest in the Texas guys, how would you rank them?
I'm going to go Helm, Golden, and is it Jonte Cook, right? That's his first name. Though, and then Wingo. Okay. Those would be that's how I would put it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Helm, I think, will end up being the more popular, and nobody's going to be massive chalk here, but definitely guys to mix and match in your GPP builds for sure.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Trying to scroll through to see if there's any. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of guys. Endries for Cal. Not just mentioned him back-to-back 100-yard games. I think you could throw him in that mix as well.
Oh, I love Endy's for GPP lineups. You could put him in cash, but he's been very good. I do like Endy's. That's a good call.
All right. With that, I think we are through everything on the DraftKings front at this time. We usually like to have John give a little recap with his fantastic 4 plays, and then we'll talk some FanDuel before we get out of here. So take it away, John. What do you got for Fantastic 4 this week?
So the great thing about being a RotoGrinders participant teammate is you get to use our optimizer each week. And I have a fantastic 4 to plug into your lineups. At quarterback, I'm putting Josh Hoover. We talked about him earlier today. I love that environment for Texas Tech and TCU. We have a 35-point implied total for the Horned Frogs. So give me their quarterback in that matchup. In cash games, we've mentioned it a ton. It's Mekhi Hughes. That over-under is too solid. The North Texas defense can't stop anyone. Love Mekhi Hughes. This is the wide receiver who I like a lot this week. Darius Lassiter of BYU. Vegas is saying that UCF is the favorite. Well, what does that tell us game script? BYU should be playing from behind. That means they're going to put the ball in the air. If you've been watching the Cougars and watching this passing game, Darius Lassiter has been great the last 3 weeks. He's definitely the number 1 guy for the Cougars. He's only 5.8, so I do like that salary with the very nice ceiling. So I like Lassiter in that environment. And last but not least, we talked about the Oregon passing game. Yes, I think Tez Johnson is lock button. I think he's going to dominate. But Justin, how is Evan Stewart 4.2? I think he is just wildly underpriced. You can actually put Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart together because I do think Oregon's going to put up a lot of points in this game through the air. So I love Evan Stewart at 4.2. So my Fantastic 4, put it in our lineup, in our optimizer. Josh Hoover at quarterback, Mekhi Hughes at running back, Darius Lassiter at wide receiver, and Evan Stewart at wide receiver. You'll get some really nice lineup builds.
All right. Like those 4 calls today for sure. And with that, we can probably pivot on over to FanDuel. So we'll talk about the FanDuel slate here. Again, FanDuel adds some of the night games that are not on the main slate for DraftKings. So their slate looks a little bit different. We've got 5 night games, some decent real life games, maybe not the most exciting night slate for fantasy purposes tonight, but Miami facing a very disappointing Florida State team, LSU, Texas A&M, Penn State, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Michigan, and Kansas State, some of the games that FanDuel has added to their main slate this week. Some of the quarterbacks that you can get in those games, Cam Ward, Avery Johnson, obviously 2 high ceiling guys, Nussmeier for LSU, Jalen Daniels, if you want to play a risky GPP option, but who do you like at quarterback here on FanDuel?
My favorite player that I like is Avery Johnson because of the, not a huge savings, but there's enough of savings at the quarterback position. Why I got to change my list. I didn't upgrade it to just quarterbacks. I had all the players mixed. Avery Johnson is what? Oh, here we go. 10K
on FanDuel.
So you do save a little bit, and he has rushing upside, and I kind of like Kansas State. They've been playing some pretty good football lately, Justin. And Avery Johnson, if you've been watching him, he's getting better as the year goes along. However, I think the question to me when I was building, and I've really grown to like the FanDuel slate with the more games, especially these bigger games at night, I think it's Cam Ward. I will say this. Coaches want to tell recruits that we've had Heisman Trophy winners. I'm very interested now. Is Mario Cristobal and that coaching staff, are they just really going to let Cam Ward put up those 40? What's he got, 25, 26 touchdowns already? Are they just going to let him air it out so he gets the 40, 42, 45 touchdowns? And I think they are. And I would never have believed that earlier in the summer with Mario Cristobal, with the way he's had offenses in the past. Remember, people, he had Justin Herbert. He's the only one who could slow down Justin Herbert. That was the joke when he had him at Oregon. So now he's got Cam Ward, and I'm blown away. So I do think if you're doing a lineup in cash or GPP, you do have to somehow figure out at least one lineup with Cam Ward, because the upside ceiling, he might throw 5 touchdowns tonight against Florida State. We know that Miami has no problem beating up on their in-state rival, Florida State. So I do think Cam Ward has to be in play no matter what you do.
And they probably will beat up on them, given the way that that Florida State has played this year. That's probably a pretty safe assumption. So no offense, but the Florida State fans probably won't take any offense at this stage. So yeah, I like Johnson and Ward as well. If you've got the money to spend, of course, DJ Giddens is probably going to get just as much ownership. Again, I don't like the night games as much this week. My player pool doesn't have a whole lot of guys added. Restrepo obviously would be the logical pairing with Ward. Loveland for Michigan, their tight end, I think is a nice value, but really the night slate just doesn't add a whole lot to me. Most of my FanDuel main slate exposure will be to a lot of the same guys we talked about with the DraftKings slate. So anybody else you want to add at running back or receiver? We do have one question I want to make sure I get to from NBA DFS in FanDuel, but anybody else you want to add to the FanDuel mix here?
I do agree with you on DJ Givens. One player, you mentioned it, and I like your idea that Washington might win. How about Jonah Coleman, the running back for Washington? We have him projected at less than 5% on FanDuel. We have him at a very healthy 15 points, so that's nice. But remember, he could do like the 2 rushing touchdowns. So I think it's an interesting pivot. I am interested in Jonah Coleman, especially if you think Washington's going to pull the upset or at least keep the game really close. So I'm very interested in Jonah Coleman in that game. And then at wide receiver, you mentioned him on DraftKings, but I like him a little bit better on FanDuel. Wide receiver Josh Kelly of Texas Tech. Yeah. I think his salaries in proportion seems a little bit better of a value. I do like Josh Kelly of Texas Tech on the FanDuel slate.
All right. And the question that we had gotten, thank you for the unintentional segue there, but it's perfect. It's a FanDuel cash question. It is the 2v2 combo. So would you play RJ Harvey with Josh Kelly or Taj Brooks with Restrepo? Which combo do you like better?
I'm going to go the RJ Harvey with Josh Kelly combo. I think it's very sneaky in GPP. I think it's a little less ownership. I like that one very much.
So, and I think he did specify cash games. In cash games, would you go the other?
Yes, I would go the other in cash games. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Brooks and Restrepo, that's probably where I would go in cash games as well. But I do agree with the call for GPPs if you're debating between those. I like Harvey in GPPs today. He won't be super highly owned at his salaries. So, okay, I have not seen a whole lot of news updates throughout the show here. I don't see anything. Missouri, that game is later. Let me check one other spot here before we go off the air. Let's see. As of now, Trey Harris, quote, should be good to go for the Ole Miss network. Whatever. I'm not playing them against Oklahoma's defense. So that doesn't change a whole lot to me.
No, all right. I agree. I'm not. I'm just right now. They really disappointed me. I got to see them put together their 35-point offense again right now because their salaries are just so high and they're not coming close. That's the problem.
All right. With that, we'll go ahead and call it a show today. Thanks to TJ for producing behind the scenes for us. Again, if you didn't earlier, make sure you hit that thumbs up button before you exit the YouTube stream. We appreciate that very much. So thanks to TJ for helping out. Thanks to John for joining me. Of course, I'm Justin. We'll be back here next Saturday, first Saturday in November already next week. Enjoy the fall season, everybody. We will catch you back here next week. Same time, same place. Until then, good luck, and we'll see you later.